Frankie Voss never expected to be knocked off her feet literally by a man in an Armani suit holding a tattered copy of The Great Gatsby. The library was quiet, as usual, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the soft rustle of pages and the distant click of a keyboard. It was her favorite part of the day just after lunch, when the regulars trickled in and the world felt calm. Until the front door swung open with enough force to rattle the old brass bell that hadn't worked properly in years. And in walked a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine, not inside a dusty community library in the middle of Brooklyn. He stopped at the front desk, holding out the book like it was something sacred, like it hadn't been left in the gutter 2 blocks down. Frankie blinked at him. "You found that on the street?" His eyes were a stormy shade of gray, sharp and searching. "No," he said, voice smooth like melted chocolate. "I dropped it. Came back for it, but it was gone. Someone must have brought it here." Frankie narrowed her eyes. "You're telling me you dropped a library book on the street?" "I'm telling you I didn't mean to," he replied, lips twitching like he was trying not to laugh. "And I wanted to return it properly." She took the book from him, flipping it open. There was the barcode, the library stamp, and a return date from 3 weeks ago. "Well, congratulations. You've just paid off your first late fee." "I'll survive," he said, eyes never leaving hers. She raised an eyebrow. "Name for the record?" There was a pause. "Galen Vale." Frankie typed it in, then froze. The system flagged his name instantly, a donor. Not just any donor, the donor. Galen Vale, the man who had anonymously given $2 million to save the library from shutting down last year. She looked up, stunned. You're that Galen Vale?" He looked like he wanted to disappear for a second. "I didn't think they kept that on record." "They keep everything on record. You pretty much saved this place." He shrugged, brushing a hand over the front of his dark coat. "I just like the idea of kids still being able to check out books that don't come with a screen." She stared at him. "You're a billionaire." He looked uncomfortable. "Technically. You're a billionaire who came all the way back here to return a dropped library book?" He gave her a look that was far too serious for the situation. "It was my favorite growing up. I couldn't leave it behind." Frankie leaned on the desk, watching him like he was a puzzle she hadn't figured out yet. "You could have just bought another copy." "Wouldn't have been the same," he said, then smiled. "Besides, I was hoping to meet the librarian." She blinked. "Why?" "Because I heard she's the only person in this city who still shushes people." She laughed. Loudly. "Oh, I definitely do. I can tell," he said, eyes warming. "You look like you run this place with an iron bookmark." Frankie snorted. "I'm putting that on my business card." He glanced at the desk clock. "You have a break soon?" She hesitated. "Why?" He leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice. "Because I'd like to take you for coffee. Or tea. Or whatever people like you drink when they're not alphabetizing biographies." She stared at him, the man who just confessed to being a billionaire, asking her someone who made more late fee calls than friends to coffee. "I don't even know you," she said finally. "Then let's fix that." Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't just charm. There was something honest in his voice. Something strangely grounded. She glanced toward the back room. "Give me 5 minutes." He grinned. The cafe down the street was small and quiet, tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner. Galen ordered her an Earl Grey with honey before she could say anything, and she raised an eyebrow again. "You read minds too? You just seem like the type." They sat by the window, and the conversation was easy. Too easy. Frankie found herself laughing more than she had in months. Galen didn't talk about money or business. He talked about books, about growing up in Queens, about how his mom used to take him to the library after school because she couldn't afford a babysitter. "I owe a lot to places like that," he said. "They made me believe I could be something." She looked at him differently after that. "You don't act like a billionaire," she said, sipping her tea. "Should I? I don't know. I expected more. Arrogance. Helicopters. Maybe a diamond watch. I have all those things," he said. "I just don't bring them to coffee dates." Her heart kicked. "This is a date?" He looked at her, expression soft. It could be. Frankie looked down at her cup. You're not exactly the kind of guy who usually walks into my life. Maybe I should have walked in sooner. The next time he came in, it was with a donation of 10 brand new laptops. The time after that, he brought a rare first edition for the special collections room. And after that, he brought lunch. For the whole staff. Every time, he stayed a little longer. Every time, he looked at her like she was the only reason he came back. At first, she told herself it was just flotation. Rich guy bored with his own world, dipping into hers for entertainment. But then came the night he waited outside the library in the rain just to walk her home. The morning he showed up with her favorite muffins from a bakery 3 neighborhoods away. The time he fixed the broken heater himself when the building maintenance ghosted them. And she started to believe him. Believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't pretending. That maybe he had really come back for her. One evening, as they locked up the library together, he looked at her and said, I've been in rooms with presidents, Frankie. Flown across oceans in my own jet. But nothing's made me feel the way I do when I'm standing next to you. She froze. Don't say that unless you mean it. I've never meant anything more. Her heart pounded in her chest. You're serious. I'm falling for you, he said quietly. Hard. And before she could stop herself, before she could talk herself out of it, she kissed him. Right there in the middle of the library steps, under the glow of the street lamp. And Galen Vale, billionaire, philanthropist, and the man who returned a dropped library book wrapped his arms around her like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. Frankie stood behind the library's circulation desk, staring at the return slot like it had betrayed her. The air still held a trace of the cologne Galen had worn the night he kissed her. She hadn't seen him for 3 days. Not a call. Not a visit. Nothing. It was ridiculous. They weren't even officially anything. But the silence rang louder than she expected. She had never cared whether a man called her back before. But then again, she had never kissed someone who made her feel like the world had flipped on its axis. Hey, Frankie, came a voice from the side. It was Devin, one of the part-time pages carrying a box of donated books. You okay? You look like you're about to interrogate that book cart. Frankie blinked. Yeah, just tired. He gave her a doubtful look but didn't press. She spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through returns, shelving nonfiction, and avoiding any thoughts of gray eyes or velvet-voiced billionaires. But as the sun dipped behind the brownstones, casting long shadows through the front windows, the brass door handle turned. Galen stepped inside. He was dressed in a fitted navy coat, a scarf tucked neatly around his neck, and an expression that gave away nothing. Frankie didn't move from behind the desk. Where have you been? She asked, her voice flat. I was in Geneva, he said. Board meeting came up last minute. I didn't want to leave without saying something, but I was already late to the airport. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk. You couldn't send a message? I don't have your number. Her heart stuttered. You never asked for it. That was stupid of me, he said. I won't make that mistake again. She stepped out from behind the desk, walking slowly toward him. So you fly across continents without warning, and now you're just back like nothing happened? I'm not pretending nothing happened, he said. I've thought about you every hour since I left. She stopped a few feet away. That kiss wasn't a game to me, Galen. Neither was it to me. They stood there in the stillness of the library, the only sound the faint hum of the old heating vent. He took a careful step closer. I want more than one kiss. I want more than just showing up with books and laptops. I want more than coffee breaks and surprise muffins. She crossed her arms. What exactly do you want? Time, he said. With you. Dinners. Walks. Arguments. Everything. Frankie searched his face, trying to find the catch. But his voice held a conviction she hadn't heard before. I don't know how to do this billionaire dating thing, she said. I don't know which fork to use at fancy restaurants. I've never had a driver. Then we'll eat with our hands. I'll take the subway. I don't care how we do it as long as it's with you. She let out a breath. You're serious. I've never been more. She didn't answer right away. But then she reached into her back pocket, pulled out a worn library card, and wrote her number on the back with a pen she always kept in her bun. Next time you leave the country, she said, handing it to him, you better use it. He smiled, the kind that didn't need charm or polish, the kind that was just for her. Later that evening, Galen picked her up outside the library's side entrance in a dark sedan that gleamed beneath the streetlight. She expected a driver, but he was behind the wheel himself, sleeves rolled up, coat tossed in the back seat. You drive yourself? She asked as she slid in. I told you. No chauffeurs tonight. The restaurant he took her to sat above a flower market in Chelsea, accessible only through an unmarked door and a private elevator. Inside, it was all soft candlelight, pressed linen, and a view of the Hudson stretching into the dark. Frankie set her purse on the table, feeling the tension in her shoulders. This place has more forks than I have in my entire apartment. You don't have to impress anyone here, Galen said, unfolding a napkin onto his lap. Especially not me. She glanced at the menu and blinked at the prices. You know this fish costs more than my rent. Then I'll order two, he said deadpan. I'm serious. So am I. She looked at him across the table, the flickering light catching the edge of his cheekbone. He didn't look like a man trying to show off. He looked like someone who had spent years alone in rooms full of people who didn't know him and was finally sitting across from someone who might. Why me? She asked suddenly. You could be with anyone. He leaned back in his chair, considering her. Because you don't need anything from me. Not money, not favors. You don't pretend to be impressed. You saw me as a man with a book before you saw me as anything else. I still see you as a man with a book. Good, he said. That's who I want to be. Their dinner stretched into hours filled with stories neither had told anyone else. Frankie confessed that she used to dream of being a writer, but the world had made her practical. Galen admitted he hadn't had a real friend in years. Just allies. Contacts. People who smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. When they left, it was almost midnight. The streets were quiet, the city hushed in its own rhythm. Do you want to come up? He asked as they pulled in front of a sleek building with a glass awning. I wasn't expecting that. Just to the rooftop, he said. I promise. No pressure. Curiosity won out. The elevator opened into a private terrace ringed with low lights and potted olive trees. In the center stood a table with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine already uncorked. You planned this. I hoped, he said. They sat beneath the stars, the city glittering below them. Frankie curled her hands around the stem of her glass, watching him. I don't do fairy tales, she said quietly. They never end well for people like me. Then let's write a new one, he said. One that ends how we want it to. He reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I've spent years building an empire, he said. But I never built a life. Not until I met you. She looked at him and something inside her shifted. The walls she had built out of practicality and caution began to crack. She set down her glass. Kiss me again, she said. And he did. But this time it wasn't impulsive. This time it was a promise. Frankie should have known things wouldn't stay simple. The morning after the rooftop, she stepped into the library expecting the usual dusty air, Dewey Decimals, and a to-do list that never got shorter. What she didn't expect was a woman in a cream-colored blazer waiting by the front desk, tapping a pen against a leather-bound planner like it owed her money. You must be Francis Voss, she said, eyes cool and assessing. Frankie felt her stomach tighten. Just Frankie. Can I help you? I'm here on behalf of the Vale Foundation. The woman extended a card. Frankie barely glanced at it. The name Clara Whitmore was printed in gold foil. We're finalizing the media schedule for the upcoming literacy gala, Clara continued. Galen mentioned he's bringing a guest. I assume that's you. Frankie blinked. He didn't mention anything about a gala. Clara's mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. He tends to make decisions quickly. You'll need a gown. We've scheduled a fitting this afternoon at 4. Bergdorf's personal styling team. Just give your name. Frankie stared at her. You're serious? I'm always serious. Clara turned to leave, but not before adding, there will be press. You might want to prepare. By the time she disappeared through the door, Frankie was gripping the edge of the desk hard enough to leave dents in the wood. She found Galen 2 hours later waiting in the back corner of the library's nonfiction section, flipping through a book on urban architecture like it was just another Tuesday. "You sent a woman to schedule me like a dentist appointment?" He lowered the book slowly. "I thought it would be easier." "Easier than what?" "Asking me. You're not exactly reachable during the day. You could have waited 5 minutes. Or tried not to ambush me with a stranger who thinks I'm a PR liability." Galen stepped forward, his tone calm. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He hesitated. "The gala's important. It's the biggest event the foundation does all year. I want you there. You didn't even ask if I'd be comfortable. I didn't want to pressure you. Then you shouldn't have made the decision for me." They stood in silence, surrounded by biographies and the faint scent of aging paper. For a moment, Frankie wished things had stayed simple. Before rooftops. Before kisses. Before Clara Whitmore and her gold-foiled business cards. Galen's voice softened. "You're right. I overstepped." She crossed her arms. "Why do I feel like this is your world and I'm just passing through it?" "Because I haven't done a good job making you feel like you belong in it," he said. "Let me fix that." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. Later that afternoon, she stood in a penthouse suite at Bergdorf Goodman with a stylist fussing over her hemline and a seamstress adjusting the fit of the bodice. The room smelled like jasmine and polished marble. "You're the librarian, right?" the stylist asked, pinning fabric. "He told us to make it unforgettable." Frankie stared at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Sleek lines, delicate beadwork, hair swept up like she belonged on a red carpet instead of behind a circulation desk. When she arrived at the gala that evening, Galen was already waiting by the entrance, dressed in a charcoal tuxedo that made the word handsome feel entirely inadequate. He looked up and froze. "You. Wow." She held up the hem of her dress as she stepped onto the marble floor. "You told them to make it unforgettable. I didn't expect to forget how to breathe." They walked side by side through the grand ballroom, past glittering chandeliers and velvet-draped tables, nodding to faces Frankie didn't recognize. She tried to keep her posture straight, her expression polite, but every few seconds Galen's hand found the small of her back, steady and reassuring. They took their seats at the head table beside donors and city officials. A woman with a diamond choker leaned over, whispering to Galen about a real estate merger. A man in a navy suit asked if he'd consider a seat on a tech advisory board. Frankie listened, quiet and out of place, until the MC called Galen to the stage. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the podium as the lights dimmed slightly. The room hushed. "Tonight isn't about investments or innovation," he began. "It's about stories. The ones we grew up with, the ones we pass on, the ones that shape who we are." His eyes found Frankie in the crowd. "I spent most of my childhood in a neighborhood where stories were the only escape we had. Libraries weren't just buildings, they were lifelines." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "I'm here because someone once handed me a book instead of judgment. I'm here because someone believed access to knowledge shouldn't depend on your zip code." He paused. "And I'm standing here tonight with someone who reminded me of that. Someone who doesn't care about titles or bank accounts. Someone who taught me that being seen is more powerful than being admired." Frankie's cheeks burned. All eyes turned to her. She kept her gaze locked on him. "I don't want to live in a world where she isn't seen too." Applause broke out slowly, then built into something real. Galen stepped down from the stage, returning to his seat. He reached for Frankie's hand under the table. "That was," she began. "I meant every word." As the night wore on, people approached her. A publisher. A city councilwoman. A teacher from Queens who recognized her from a newsletter Galen had once circulated. "You're the librarian," they kept saying. "The one who saved the building." No one had ever spoken about her like that before. By the end of the night, her feet ached, her throat was dry, and her brain buzzed with too many names and too many opinions. But when Galen took her hand again and led her into the courtyard behind the ballroom, the noise faded. The garden was wrapped in fairy lights. Roses bloomed in neat rows. A small string quartet played something soft and elegant in the distance. "You didn't have to put me on display," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "I just wanted them to see what I see." She turned to him. "You make it hard to stay mad. I'm not trying to win points. Then what are you doing? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, square envelope. I was going to wait, but I don't want to. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter of endowment $200,000. Donated in her name to the library for a new children's reading wing. Her name, not his. Her throat tightened. Why? Because that place is more yours than mine. And because every kid who walks through those doors deserves the same chance you gave me. She stared at him, overwhelmed. I don't know what this is between us, she said, but it's starting to feel like a story I want to keep reading. Then let's not put it back on the shelf. He pulled her into his arms as the music shifted into a slow waltz. They danced beneath the lights, surrounded by roses and the quiet hum of the city. The night stretched around them like a promise. For the first time, Frankie didn't feel like she was just visiting his world. She felt like she belonged in it. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows of Galen's study, a muffled rhythm that filled the quiet space. Frankie stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed, watching the flames twitch and curl. The scent of cedar and aged leather wrapped around her, softened only slightly by the steam rising from the untouched mug of tea on the table beside her. Galen leaned against the far wall, his tie loose, his sleeves pushed up, his gaze fixed on her with a calm she didn't trust yet. I got a call today, she said finally, not looking at him. From the library board. He straightened. About the endowment? No, about a job offer. Director of Citywide Literacy Initiatives. They want someone to spearhead expansion for underserved communities. It's a 3-year position. Full benefits. Oversight of 22 libraries. His brow lifted. That sounds like something you've earned. It's in Boston. Silence stretched between them. She finally turned to face him. I haven't said yes. I wouldn't ask you to say no. I didn't expect you to. He walked to the window, the rain outlining his reflection in silver. Would you have even considered something like that before? Before what? Before me. She didn't answer right away. I've spent most of my life thinking small. Not because I lacked ambition, but because I didn't think I had the right to want more. You changed that. You made me feel like the world wasn't closed off. His voice dropped. So go open it. I don't want to leave you behind. He turned. Then don't. Her eyebrows pulled together. What does that mean? It means I've been thinking too. About how much of my life I've kept walled off. About how I've built this empire but left no space in it for something real. You woke me up, Frankie. You made me see what I'd been missing. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. And what's that? Someone who doesn't care about my last name. Or my net worth. Someone who tells me when I'm being a jackass and still looks at me like I'm worth the trouble. She laughed despite herself. I don't want to lose you, he said. But I won't be the reason you shrink your life to fit mine. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. I don't want to fit into anyone's life. I want to build one. With someone who sees me. Galen walked toward her, slow and certain. When he stopped in front of her, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. You're not serious. I've never been more. This is insane. Maybe. But so was falling for someone over a dropped library book. He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike anything she expected. No giant stone. No flashy metal. Just a simple platinum band engraved with 2 words, come home. I'm not asking for a wedding tomorrow, he said. I'm asking you to let me be part of your life wherever it takes you. Whether that's Boston or Brooklyn or somewhere we haven't even imagined yet. She stared at the ring, then at him. You're proposing I take a job in another city and marry you? I'm proposing we build a future that doesn't look like anyone else's. One where we figure it out day by day. Have you lost your mind? Completely. You did that. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. You'd move. I'd buy a house on the edge of Boston Common tomorrow. Or rent a 1-bedroom walk-up with squeaky floors if that's what you wanted. You'd leave everything you've built? He shook his head. I'd bring what matters with me. The rest is just noise. She took the ring from the box slowly, holding it between her fingers. This isn't how I pictured my life unfolding. Neither did I. She slid the ring onto her finger. Fit perfectly. Galen's hand moved to her waist. So? She tilted her head. So we're doing this? We're doing this. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. You really are ridiculous. I know. But you're ridiculous now. He kissed her, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that felt like a signature on a contract neither of them had read but both were ready to sign. Weeks passed in a blur of motion. Frankie accepted the job. Galen arranged a temporary relocation, leasing out the penthouse and downsizing to a brownstone outside Boston that needed work but had charm in spades. She kept her old apartment for weekends in the city. He kept his foundation active but hired someone else to run day-to-day operations. For the first time, he let go of the reins, trusting that the world wouldn't collapse without him. They spent their days building something new. Frankie redesigned literacy programs from the ground up, visiting schools and shelters, rewriting outdated policies, mentoring librarians who had never had a voice in administrative decisions. Galen traded boardrooms for community centers, hosting reading events and funding mobile libraries. He sat on the floor with kids and read aloud with a voice that made them lean in, wide-eyed and silent. One afternoon, she came home to find the kitchen table covered in blueprints. What's all this? A proposal, he said, not looking up. A new space. A public reading center. Open 7 days a week, free workshops, author visits, multilingual programs. We could call it the Voss Vale Center. She stared at him. You want to name it after us? No, he said quietly. I want to name it after you. I already have my name on enough buildings. It's time yours stood for something. She sat beside him, overwhelmed. You really don't do anything halfway. Neither do you. By spring, the center broke ground. By summer, it opened with lines stretching around the block. On the first day, Frankie stood at the entrance in a navy dress with her hair down, watching families file inside. Galen stood beside her, his hand warm and steady in hers. A little boy ran past them, clutching a new book. His mother called after him, laughing. A group of teenagers found the teen lounge and immediately began arguing over which graphic novel was better. A woman in her 70s sat down in the corner, pulled out a notebook, and started writing. Frankie looked at Galen. You realize we did this? No, he said. You did this. I just followed the woman with the iron bookmark. She laughed, and it echoed through the open space like sunlight. Later that night, as they stood on the rooftop garden of their brownstone, her bare feet on the warm stone, his arm around her waist, she tilted her head back to look at the stars. I used to think happy endings were for other people. He pressed a kiss to her temple. They are. Until you fight for one. She turned to him, her voice soft. So what now? He smiled, eyes steady. Now we live it. And they did. The soft clang of the antique bell over the library's new entrance echoed through the renovated space, signaling the start of the day. Frankie walked through the glass doors, her boots tapping gently against the polished oak floors. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows of the Voss Literacy Center, casting golden patterns across the mosaic tiles near the children's wing. The scent of fresh paper, lemon oil, and spring rain clung to the air. She passed the main desk, nodding to the new librarian, an energetic young woman who had once been a teen volunteer at the original Brooklyn branch. Everything had changed, and yet pieces of the past still lingered, quiet reminders of how far things had come. Frankie stepped into her office, glancing at the fresh flowers on her desk, wild irises, lilac, and white tulips. There was no note, but she didn't need one. Galen had started sending her flowers every Monday, never with a message, never with a name. She always knew. It was his way of reminding her that even in a life full of planning and projects, some things were still just for the heart. She reached for the framed photo beside her keyboard. It was from the opening day ceremony, a candid shot of her and Galen laughing, her hands mid-gesture, his eyes on her like nothing else existed. She traced the edge of the frame thoughtfully before turning to her schedule. Her calendar was unusually light for a Wednesday. Only one appointment stood out, blocked off in red. Final site review, 2 p.m. She frowned. The project had been completed 2 weeks ago. Pushing the thought aside, she dove into her morning meetings, catching up with educators, reviewing grant proposals, and approving the next wave of community programming. By the time lunch rolled around, she was knee-deep in planning a citywide reading festival. Her phone buzzed on the desk. "I'm outside. Come with me." No name. Just the message. Frankie stood, grabbed her coat, and didn't ask questions. Galen was waiting in a navy wool jacket, leaning against a sleek black car parked at the curb. Without a word, he opened the passenger side door. "Where are we going?" she asked, sliding in. He gave her a look that made her heartbeat jump, the kind of look that said he was up to something entirely unbusinesslike. "You'll see." They drove without music, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. The city gave way to suburbs, then to winding forested roads and quiet hills, the kind you didn't find unless you were looking for them. Eventually, he turned onto a gravel path that led to a wide gate flanked by ivy-covered brick columns. Frankie sat forward as the gate creaked open. Beyond it stood a house, no, a haven. A sprawling 2-story cottage with a wraparound porch painted in soft stone tones with white trim and deep green shutters. Wildflowers lined the walkway. A weathered swing swayed gently from the large oak tree to the left. She blinked. "What is this?" Galen parked the car but didn't answer immediately. He got out and came around to open her door. "It's ours," he said simply. She stepped onto the gravel, stunned. "Galen, I don't understand. I had it built here because it's the halfway point between your new job and everything else that matters to both of us. It's not Boston. It's not Brooklyn. It's somewhere that can be just ours." She looked at the house again. "You built this. Designed it with your favorite things in mind. The kitchen looks like the one from that cookbook you used to check out as a teenager. There's a sunroom with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A garden in the back already planted with lavender and mint." She turned slowly, taking it all in. "Why now?" "Because I want to stop planning for a future that always feels like it's waiting. I want to live it. Here. With you." Her heart was thudding in her chest. "You want me to move here?" "I want us to come here. When the world gets loud. When we need quiet. When everything else feels too fast. This isn't a replacement. It's a beginning." She turned to him, emotions she wasn't ready to name rushing to the surface. "This is insane. Probably. You built me a house. I built us a home." She stared at him, her throat tight. "How do you always know exactly what I need before I do?" He slid his arms around her waist. "Because I finally learned how to listen." She rested her head against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchoring her. For a long moment, they stood there in the gravel driveway, the wind rustling the wildflowers, the trees whispering around them. Inside, the house was everything he promised. The kitchen windows overlooked the hills. The study held a fireplace and 2 armchairs that looked well-worn despite being brand new. A staircase curved elegantly to the second floor, where 3 bedrooms sat tucked beneath sloped ceilings. In the master suite, the bed was already made, the sheets crisp and white, a hardcover book resting on the nightstand, The Great Gatsby. Frankie picked it up and opened to the inside cover. "To the woman who made me believe again." She turned to find him watching her from the doorway. "I don't need a wedding to know I'm yours," she said quietly. He crossed the room. "That's good. Because I already made reservations." Her eyes narrowed. "For what?" "For a small ceremony. In the garden. This weekend." She blinked. "You planned a wedding without asking me? I hoped you'd say yes." "I figured the odds were in my favor." She tried to glare at him. "It failed. You're impossible. And you're mine." She sighed. "Fine. But I'm wearing sneakers." He grinned. "Deal." The weekend arrived in a blur of sunlight and laughter. The garden behind the cottage was transformed with white lanterns strung between trees, wildflower bouquets tied to the backs of chairs, and a small arch made of driftwood and ivy. Frankie wore a simple ivory dress with sleeves that danced in the breeze. Her sneakers were pale blue. Galen stood at the altar in a dark vest and rolled sleeves, no tie, just a small daisy pinned to his chest. There were only 20 guests, friends they trusted, people who mattered. When they exchanged vows, Galen didn't read from paper. "I didn't write anything down," he admitted. "Because with you, the words always come. I didn't know what it meant to love fully until I met you. You're not just the story I want to tell, you're the reason I believe in them again." Frankie's voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "I spent so long thinking I had to do everything alone, that it was safer. But then you walked into my world and made it bigger. And now I don't want to close the book. I just want to keep turning the pages with you." They kissed under the arch with the sound of wind through the trees and the rustle of flowers all around them. That night, they sat on the porch as fireflies lit the yard. The stars above felt impossibly close, like they were just waiting to be counted. Galen poured wine into 2 glasses and handed her one. "So," he said, "Mrs. Vale?" She raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Voss Vale." He lifted his glass. "To a life that doesn't follow the rules. To a love that never needed them." They clinked glasses and leaned into each other as the night grew quiet. In the years that followed, they lived exactly as they promised, between cities and silence, between progress and pause. The Literacy Center expanded to 4 new states. Frankie published a children's book based on the community stories she collected. Galen wrote essays about education and memory, donating all proceeds back into the foundation. They came to the cottage on weekends, on holidays, on days when the world felt too heavy. Sometimes they came just because they missed the sound of nothing. And in the mornings, when dew still clung to the grass and the house smelled like coffee and lilacs, Galen would find Frankie on the porch, book in hand, eyes bright. He would kiss the top of her head and sit beside her, no words needed. Because they had already written their story. And they were still living it.